Hey, what's up everybody? Ramey here, and what we're talking about is the difference between 1" and 5/8 holes on your squat rack. The first thing I want to point out here is when we're talking about the difference between these holes, the integrity, the type of rack we're talking about is exactly the same. We're talking about a 3x3 rack, and we're talking about 11 gauge steel. So these racks themselves are the same. There's just a different in holes, different size holes. We're gonna talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each of those, and I'm gonna go through several categories. The first thing I wanna do though, is I wanna show you what each one of these looks like. So here we go. All right, so what I'm gonna show you is the difference between 5/8 and 1/8 inch. You can see the 5/8 inch pipe and you can see the 1" pipe. So you can see that the 1" is roughly double the size. Now we're going to talk about if that makes a difference in strength and how much of a difference it actually makes. But the first category that we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about rack sizing, because believe it or not, when you're choosing between 1/8 and 5/8 inch, there is a difference in size of rack. So let's go and talk about that first. All right, so size of the rack. So the depth of the rack is one of the first things you need to consider when you're talking about 1" versus 5/8 inch rack, and I'll explain why. So you need to ask yourself while you're putting together your gym or building your rack, how much size do I have? So the rack that I'm in right now is 24 inches wide, or in depth. 24 inches depth is perfect for me. I can bench in the rack, I can squat in the rack, and I can deadlift in the rack. But for some people, 24 inches feels a little too tight for them. They'd rather have 30 or 36 or even larger. So one of the first things you need to consider is depth of the rack. Why? Because most companies make a 5/8 inch version in 24, 30, and maybe 36, especially like Titan and Rep, and you'll see some variation in Rogue as well. But when you start to go to the 1" holes, they usually start at 30 inches. So if you wanted a 24 inch depth rack, that's all you had the space for at your house, you're automatically at 5/8 inches. You can't, the main companies are not making a 1" hole rack that's only 24 inch depth. So that's the first consideration is size. If you're looking at like that 30 inch, you can pretty much go 5/8 or 1" because they're gonna make both versions. And I'll show you a little chart here in a minute that kind of compares that. But basically, yeah, if you're looking for 24 inch depth like I am, you were limited automatically to 5/8 inches. All right, next thing we're gonna look at is let's actually talk about, so that's depth, that's the first thing, the rack size. Next thing is the holes. The holes is huge, it's hole spacing. Clearly they're 5/8 inch versus 1" holes, so there's a difference in size as I showed you the pins. But there's a difference in the hole spacing on the rack. All right, before I talk about the hole spacing differences between a 1" and 5/8 inch rack, what I want to do is I want to talk about how you measure the spacing on these racks. So if this is right here, this is a 2" difference. What that means is from the center of the hole to the center of the other hole is exactly 2 inches. From the center to the center. It's not like from the top or bottom or anything like that. So when I say the words 1", I'm meaning 1". This is an example of 1". Center to center, 2" center to center, 6" center to center, okay? We got that difference? All right, let's take a look at both 5/8 and 1" hole racks, and let me talk about some of the differences in hole spacing. Okay, so now that I've clarified how the sizing of the holes is, I'm actually gonna go and show you guys a picture because I think it's much better to show you what these racks look like through an image so we can see the whole entire thing very clear. So the first thing that we're looking at here is a 5/8 inch hole rack. Now I'm gonna talk about the hole spacing in a 5/8 inch rack and then a 1" rack so you can see the clear differences. So on a 5/8 inch rack, you can see going up and down until we get to about center. The holes are 2 inches apart. They're 2 inches apart. 2 inches is a pretty good standard for hole size spacing. But then as you see, as we get here in the middle here, let me zoom in for you. As we get into the middle here, you can see that the holes get really, really tiny close together. This is something called West Side spacing, made popular by the popular West Side powerlifting gym. And what it is these are 1" spacing holes that can only be accomplished with 5/8 inch holes. You can't do this with 1", which is one of the big differences, but there are still differences in 1", so we'll get there. But what this allows you to do is it allows you on your bench press or other exercises to really customize the height of your J-cup and your safety so that you can, make sure that everything's at the right height for you. This allows you to really fine tune it. Who is this great for? Really anyone that wants to make that micro adjustment. And there are some ways around this, but I'm going to get there. But this allows you to really fine tune where you're going to lift. So this is one of the big advantages, something that people like is called west side spacing. Just means these holes are 1 inch apart around this bench press area. All right, now, when we get to the side of the rack of these 5/8 inch hole racks, and you can actually see here as I'm zoomed in, you can see hole, 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 hole. The sides of the rack generally have holes between like 5 and 6 inches going up and down. So every 5 to 6 inches, there's a hold rack. Now, while there's this huge advantage in west side spacing in that you can fine tune where your rack is, if you're putting attachments on the side of your rack, you can only put them every 5 or 6 inches. So that's one of the disadvantages of a 5/8 inch rack, is that the holes on the sides are only every 5 to 6 inches. Okay. Now, so that's the spacing on a 5/8 inch rack. Let's get into a 1 inch rack and show you the differences there. All right, so we've got a 1 inch rack on the screen, and immediately you're gonna see some big differences. So the first thing that you're gonna see, so let's talk about the front of the rack. So on the front of the rack, we have 1 inch holes, so they're a little bigger, but again, just like the 5/8 inch rack on the top and bottom, they are 2 inches apart, except in the middle here, there's no west side spacing. The holes are 2 inches apart going up and down the entire rack. Now what that means is it's a little more difficult to fine tune where you're going to set up your bench, safeties, your J-cups, that kind of thing, which can be a disadvantage for some people, but for others it won't make a difference. What you will notice is that on the side of the rack is that the holes are going up and down the whole entire side of the rack 2 inches. So the advantage here, while you lose the advantage of the west side spacing, you gain an advantage in that you can put your attachments on the side going up and down pretty much every 2 inches if you are one who's going to put attachments on the side of your rack. Okay, so those are the two big differences between 5/8 and 1 inch as far as holes, where the holes are on the rack. So now that I have both of these on the screen, let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each of these holes before we move on to the next components of the video, which are other things to compare. So when we talk about, well, the advantage of the 5/8 is that it has this west side spacing on the front. The advantage of the 1 inch is that it has the holes on the side. In reality, neither of those things matter to most people. They really don't matter that much at all. To certain people, west side spacing is going to be huge. When you're lifting a significant amount of weight, just a 1 inch difference, a half an inch difference can make a huge difference in getting it off the bar. And there are some workarounds, like some people put a board under their bench so that they can actually move themselves up and down a little bit, or they'll put like, a thick piece of something on their pin and pipes so that it's a little thicker so that their safeties are in the right place. So there's some workarounds for that west side spacing that people will go through. And then the side holes on the 1 inch rack, that's the advantage there. Most people don't use those either. Yes, there are some uses for them. Like there's gonna be some people who are like, well, I want this on the side in this place. But most people don't use those side holes. So really the advantages of the hole spacing on each of these doesn't make much of a difference for most people. Now, if you're saying, well, it makes a difference from west side spacing, makes a huge difference for me, then yes, then get west side spacing. But I'm saying for most people, it's not going to make a difference. Side thing, you're like, but I want this one thing on the side in this one place. Okay, then you need to go with 1 inch because that makes sense for you. And there are workarounds for each of these. For example, on the 5/8 inch rack, let's say you really want something on the side, an attachment, you can always drill a hole wherever you want to in the rack and make it. If you want west side spacing in the 1 inch, you can always put a board or whatever to increase your height. So there are workarounds for each of these. All right, so that's what it comes down to when we talk about holes. All right, ready to move on to the next thing now that we've talked about like the hole placement, spacing, and sizing? Okay, let's move on to the next thing. The next thing that we're going to talk about are the attachments for these racks. So, and there's a couple parts to that. There is, what are the attachments? Are the attachments different? Are there differences in cost of the attachments? And are there differences in the weight capacity of what the attachments can actually do? So what I did here is I created a little chart. You can see it here. And what I've done is I've taken some of the main attachments that people will purchase. I've put the cost of them on 5/8 versus 1 inch, and I've put if there's a difference in like the amount of weight that the attachment can take. All right, so let's start out. So basically what I want to say first of all is that as far as attachments go, so in general, most companies make the same attachments for 5/8 and 1/8 inch. However, some companies, like for example, if I take Rogue, usually when they're making an attachment, they usually will release it first on their 1 inch Monster line of rack, and it may or may not come to their 5/8 inch Monster light inch rack. Companies like Rep tend to release all attachments at the same time to both their 4000 and 5000. And Titan is kind of all over the place about what they actually do. They actually have some attachments for their lower end racks that they don't have for anything else. So I can't find a rhyme or reason there with Titan Fitness. And those are the main three companies. There's a lot more. So you have to look at the company you want. But one of the big things you have to ask yourself when looking at these two is, what attachments do I want? And does the company I'm planning to purchase from make those attachments for the rack hole sizing I'm trying to do? Certain attachments. So are there attachments that are only on 1 inch and not 5/8? Yes, there are a few. Some of those include like the leg rollers, the one single post leg rollers, I should clarify. So if you're looking for single post leg rollers, those are a huge thing for you. The 5/8 inch rack may not be something you consider, or you may have to drill a hole to make it in your 5/8 inch rack. Another thing is certain companies only make like a monolift for a 1 inch rack versus 5/8, but like Rep Fitness makes it for both. So usually like the more advanced attachments, like the more complicated advanced attachments, sometimes will only be on 1 inch versus 5/8. So you need to figure out if you are using those. Now I'm in this position where I don't really use the attachments that I use are all safety, like J-cup, spotter arms, pin and pipes, safety straps, that kind of thing. And those are made for everything, for every company. So I really didn't have there wasn't a difference in attachments for me, because what I kind of find is that the big attachments that are like sophisticated, like a leg curl machine that only might be on the 1 inch, like in Titan Fitness, they're really big and cumbersome, and they're not something I would buy anyway. And they're also like $500. Like some of them are very pricey. So like they're way out of what I would spend on an attachment. So that didn't make a difference for me. I just have to tell you to go look and see what attachments you specifically want and need, and what the companies offer. So what I did here is I put some of the basic attachments like spotter arms, safety straps, J-cups, for each company, Rep, Rogue, and Titan Fitness. And what I've done is I've put down what do they cost and what is the weight capacity difference. So what you'll notice is that 1 inch sizing is usually like the premium of the company. Like the 5/8 inch is the high-end middle ground, whereas 1 inch is like the highest end premium of the company. So what you're going to notice is there is a difference in cost, and we'll talk about the racks costs when we get back to the overall when we get there. But what you're going to notice is comparing the prices of items for 5/8 versus 1/8 inch, you can see some differences. Like in Rep Fitness, pretty much every single item that's 1 inch is a little more money. Like the spotter arms are $60 more. The safety straps are $40 more, $30 more. The J-cups are $10 more. The flip down safeties are, $60, $70 more. The band pegs are $40 more. So there are $30 more. So there are some big differences in price. And that goes through in Rogue, those differences are even more pronounced. Like the spotter arms, there's $100-some difference in the spotter arms between the 5/8 Monster Light and 1 inch in Rogue Fitness. And for Titan, same thing. There's differences in the price between 5/8 and 1 inch. So if cost is a major concern for you for attachments, just buying, these are like the basic things that everyone's probably going to buy. You're going to save like $100+ by going 5/8 versus 1 inch. So if money's a big, tight concern for you, that's definitely a consideration. But the next thing that I find the most interesting is when I start to look at the weight capacity difference. Like, how much can the spotter arms, like the spotter arms for the 1 inch cost more money in the Monster? So is the 1 inch steel stronger? Like, does it change the weight capacity? Like, I assume, like, if the spotter arms are 1,000 pounds for 5H, they'd be like 2,000 for 1 inch, right? But what I'm finding is when I look at these companies, there's actually not a difference in the weight load capacity. So like the spotter arms for Rep Fitness, whether you get 5 inch, 8 inch, or 1 inch, they both hold the same amount of weight. I couldn't find the information for the safety straps, but the J-cups and flip down safeties for Rep, exactly the same weight. So whether you have 5/8 inch or 1 inch, you can only hold the same amount of weight. It's like 1,000 or 1,500 or 2,000 pounds or whatever. But like, it doesn't matter if you go 1 inch or 5, you're not going past the limit because they're the same. Couldn't find it for the BAM pegs. Rogue for spotter arms, I couldn't find it on their website, which I thought was strange. But for their J-cups and strafe safety straps, Rogue, Monster Light, and Monster both hold the same amount of weight. Titan Fitness, Titan was the only one I could actually find a difference for. In their spotter arms, the 5/8 inch only hold 1,500 pounds, and the 1 inch hold 160, 180 more pounds, 1,680. So I don't think anyone's going to get, I mean, those are so close in numbers. I sometimes feel like Titan has these weird numbers for stuff. Those are so close in numbers, it's almost not really a difference, and no one's getting up to who's putting 1,500 pounds on safety spotter arms. But you can see that's the only difference I could find between these three companies and their products. And their safety straps, and they only had roller J-cups on their website right now because they're like sold out of everything. The weight difference capacity was also the same. So you can see, as far as like, well, is 5/8 going to hold less weight because it's only 5/8? It's not really the case. They're pretty much rated the same, more than what humans are going to lift. So now that I've talked about the weight capacity, let's look a little more at the cost between the racks themselves. I've done a comparison where I compare like all the different racks, but I'm going to show you here. And this also shows you a little bit about the depth as well, how I was talking about that earlier. As you can see, like the 3x3 by 5/8 inch racks all offer an option in 24, whereas the 3x3 1 inch all pretty much start at 30 inches or even bigger. So as I said, if depth is a concern, you got to kind of consider what your spacing is at your house. But these also, like the Titan X3 and Rep PR, they offer larger racks than 24, but they start at 24. Those are just the smallest sizes. So if depth's a concern, you kind of are limited there. But you take a look at the cost, and you can see the cost. So we did the attachment cost, but we look at the racks themselves, and you can see a pretty significant jump up for some of them. Overall, when I get into like even like Rep and Rogue, I find that the difference between 5/8 and 1 inch cost of rack is not that big of a deal. It's maybe $100 to $200, I guess, which could be for you. I don't think that's that huge of a difference. So I kind of think like it's a toss-up. But we get the Titan Fitness, like this X3 80-inch. I mean, $599, and I see that on sale for like $479 sometimes, or scratch and dent. Like, it's way huge difference between the prices. So, you know, you can find a significantly cheaper 3x3 strong 11 gauge rack that holds the same weight and almost has all the same attachments for almost half the price. The other thing I should point out, in addition to depth, is the height difference of these. In the 5/8 inch, you can usually find an option, like at least at Titan and Rep, for an 80-inch rack. Whereas when we get to the 5,000, it's more rare, the Monster and 1-inch racks. You can see like Rep does have an option for an 80-inch 5,000, you know, Monster series, but none of these other, even Titan, like they don't have an option for 80-inch. So that's a limiting factor as well, the height, that you have to consider. And one of the final big things that people talk about is future-proofing my rack, which is the direction of the future. And it's an interesting question. You know, I'm in tech and I have to look to the future all the time. Right now, it seems like most of the companies are heading towards, you know, 1 inch is the standard premium line. So I'd say if you're trying to buy for the future, 1 inch might be slightly better odds. But there is a big market for the 5/8, and some people are saying, well, if a rack company makes 5/8 inch holes going up the side, that takes away all the advantages of 1 inch. So everyone's just going to go 5/8 inch. But there's a lot of room in this industry right now for innovation, and for a company to come in, make it some kind of new cool rack, like, hey, make it 7 gauge that's just stronger, and make it with 3/4 inch holes, which can be closer than 1 inch, not as close as 5/8 inch, but stronger. And maybe they'll come in and take over the whole market. Like, you really don't know. What I can tell you about future proofing is that I'm not sure what new like cool things we're going to see as far as like attachments go. Like, future proofing usually means like interesting attachments. Like, your rack itself is going to outlive you. Your J-cup safeties, if you buy them and you're using them, like, that's all going to outlive you. So I don't know if you need to future proof that. So it's an interesting question and something to think about. So let's talk about my overall thoughts between these two. My overall thoughts are the racks themselves are the same. They're both 3x3. They're both 11 gauge steel. They both have the same weight rating and strength. Like, they're both strong, good steel racks, right? We're talking about some pieces of metal. 5/8 inch has west side spacing going down the front. Not as many holes going down the side. 1 inch has no west side spacing, but it has a bunch of holes going down the side. Which of those features matter most? As I said, to most people, neither of those features probably matter that much. So that's as far as the holes go. As far as like the other thing that I talked about, the size of the rack, if you're looking for a smaller depth, like 24 inches, you pretty much have to go 5/8 inch. If you're looking for a shorter rack, there aren't many options in 1 inch that are shorter than 90 inch. So you're almost limited to 5/8 inch there as well. But the rep does have it. If you're considering cost, you're definitely going to save money in 5/8 inch. I tell most people that the X3 is like the perfect rack for most home users because it's so cheap. You can find that for, as I said, like $500. That's like half the price of that's like a $500 savings. Plus on the attachments, you're also saving money. But the other thing to consider is, what attachments do you actually want? Like, if you want certain attachments, like that leg curl machine from Titan or whatever, it might only be on the 1 inch. So you need to go in at the companies you're looking at and say, well, what attachments are on everything? I find Rep Fitness does a good job of making their attachments available on pretty much their 4,000 and 5,000 inch racks, or their models. So they're pretty much available on everything. But again, there is a price difference. So if that price, I start adding it up and saying like, whoa, when I went ahead and I do have an X3. When I went ahead and did the pricing, like for what I wanted, I saved over $1,000 by going with an X3 over anything from Rep or anything from Rogue. I saved well over $1,000, and those were just on the rack and safeties alone. So I saved a lot of money. So if the money savings is important, that's one thing to consider. Then we consider like the strength of the attachments, like the J-cups and the safety spotter arms and stuff. As far as weight limits, as I looked and analyzed the companies and compared the differences, I couldn't really find any differences. Only one thing from Titan out of the, I only looked at 15 different items. I didn't look at every single thing on their website. But I couldn't really find any differences on like the important things like the J-cup safety spotters, except Titan, that 100-pound difference there. 15 to 1600. I really couldn't see many differences. As far as future proofing, again, I think this field, this industry's open, primed for some innovation to come over and take over. I think there's always going to be a next, later, and greater thing, or else like the companies are going to stop making money. Like, they want you to buy a new rack in 5-10 years. So like, I don't know how well that's going to work. But I would say if you're looking for attachment future proof, probably 1 inch is going to be a little more, I'd say the odds are a little better there. As far as which one you should buy, I think you got to consider all those options. Like, if you want the premium, the most expensive, just get the 1 inch, but make sure you got the space for it. If you're trying to save money, get the 5/8 inch, but make sure they have all the attachments for it from the company you go to. Overall, I really don't think it matters. I think that you're never going to outlift either of these racks. I think that you're going to make great gains on either of the racks. I think there's people lifting more weight than you on either of those racks. So that's kind of like my overall thought about it. Those are my main categories. Things to consider when you're looking at all these racks. I hope you enjoyed this video. If there are other things you notice, different things, clearly I can't predict the future. So if something changes in 6 months, you're gonna be like, no, well, I don't know what these companies are doing. But go ahead and let me know what kind of rack you have and what kind of made you make your decision later on.